welcome to another episode of Hacker's Misadventures in Scale Modeling Feature Friday. To follow up on my Gotha bomber video review, I'm going to do the German Straaken R6 bomber, which was a very huge bomber. It had wingspan almost the same size of either a B-29 or Avro Lancaster. That was big for the time. And you'll see a aerial picture that was taken of it showing how big it actually is. Now, there's only one kit I know in 72nd scale of this bomber, and that, again, by Rodin. Rodin, depending on how you pronounce it. It's a hard kit to build, especially when you're rigging it, because there's a lot of rigging to do on that bird. And the wingspan on that kit is like 3 feet. So it's a big plane. The only other kit I know of that's in 1/48 scale, I believe, is a vacuum form kit, which probably would have maybe a foot, 4.5 feet, 5 foot wingspan. Now, there's also, I heard somebody trying to scratch build one in 32nd scale, which basically would give you a 3 foot wingspan, or not 3 foot wingspan, excuse me, a 6 foot wingspan. So, anyway, let's get on with it. I will have pictures of the kits inserted into the video. Let's go have a look and see what we got here, okay?
Strategic bombers surprisingly became part of warfare in the midst of World War I, with one of the first of its kind being one of the most massive, even by World War II standards. The Zeppelin Straaken R6 was the only Riesenflugzeug, or giant aircraft, produced in quantity during World War I. It was also one of the first military aircraft with an enclosed cockpit. As the largest wooden aircraft to enter production during the war, it featured an impressive wingspan of 42.4 meters, or 138 feet, almost as big as World War II's American Boeing B-29 Superfortress. A new concept, strategic bombing. At the start of World War I in 1914, most military aviation was used for reconnaissance. Generals and military officials were mostly dismissive of utilizing planes, or at the very least reticent, since they believed that traditional cavalry could fulfill the role better. As the war progressed, however, air reconnaissance proved far superior. Even the most stubborn and conservative generals had to eventually agree that air superiority should be a priority.
You know, it's funny how the military was always hard-headed when it comes to new things and that. Like, even if they accepted the bomber for strategic bombing and that, they still were hard-headed. Like, Billy Mitchell proved that a bomber could sink a battleship, and he got court-martialed for it. He was exonerated after his death, and there was a bomber, the B-25 was named after him, but, you know, it just goes to prove sometimes people just get stuck in their ways.
In fact, their expectations and utilization of aircraft quickly began to outpace the technology of the time. The first bombing missions had pilots dropping bombs on enemy lines by hand. As the combatants of World War I entered stalemates on the front lines, the acceptance of total war saw non-combatant participants become military targets. The idea of bomber-specific aircraft to reach them began to take hold. Rather than directing firepower onto the trenches, this new idea called for destroying the adversary's capacity to wage war. It also sought to lower morale and reduce citizen support of the war effort. For these missions, aircraft would need to travel longer distances and carry much heavier bomb payloads. Strategic bombing was born. The new strategy required much larger planes that could hold more volume and fly at altitudes higher than ever before. It had been just a decade since the Wright brothers had flown the first plane. The Russian Empire was the one to pioneer in this regard. presenting their first huge bomber plane, the Sikorsky-Ilya Muromets, in 1914 after...
There is a model kit of that, too. I'll insert the image of the model back in. I'll also see if I can find a video on this aircraft, on that aircraft. I know one person that built a 32nd scale one, and it was awesome. And I believe there's a 48 scale vacuum form, but I can't prove it. But the 72nd scale one was made by Materit. I'm not too sure how to pronounce it, but anyways, it was a rough kit, very rough. I've known some guys that build it that just used the wings and scratch building a new fuselage because it was really, really bad. Anyways, it'd be nice if somebody did a new 72nd scale one. Hint, hint, hint. Anyways, let's go.
For test flying it a year earlier. Its designer, Igor Sikorsky, would later work for the United States, developing Pan American's flying boats and the first viable U.S. helicopter. Soon all parties in the First World War were partaking in strategic bombing, taking out factories, bridges, war materials, and infrastructure.
I should see if I can find a video on handling page 0100 and 0400 and V1500, because you got to get both sides of the story here.
And Graf von Zeppelin. The term Zeppelin, linked to inventor Ferdinand Graf von Zeppelin, often brings to mind the enormous, rigid, lighter-than-air airships used by the German Imperial Navy to conduct nightly bombings against London in the First World War. It's often unacknowledged, however, that Graf von Zeppelin's company also worked on some of the largest and sophisticated heavier-than-air planes during the same period. Perhaps paramount among the company's creations was the Zeppelin Straaken R.VI, the most massive bomber to attack the British Isles, bigger even than any subsequent Luftwaffe World War II aircraft. Zeppelin began working on large aircraft in 1913 after the British Daily Mail offered £10,000 to whoever built the first plane to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Pilot Helmut Hirth convinced Robert Bush of Werke to provide the funds for constructing such an aircraft so it could be presented at the 1915 San Francisco World's Fair. The start of the war killed those plans before they materialized. The aircraft design and idea still attracted multiple German manufacturers to work on similar concepts. After the Russians presented the four-engine Sikorsky-Ilya Muromets, capable of long-range bombing, the pressure was on for the other world powers to create equal or superior machines. Many recent Flugzeug giant plane designs were prepared by several manufacturers in Germany, proposing all sorts of engineering techniques and configurations. Most of them were comparable in size to today's planes and used several engines. Using multiple engines meant to provide more extended range and compensate for the low reliability of engines at the time. Therefore, most of the proposals included plans to keep tools on board to allow for mid-flight maintenance checks and repairs. Ferdinand Graf von Zeppelin, the head of Luftschiffbau Zeppelin GmbH, became immediately interested in developing his own proposal. Thus far, he had only worked on airships, so he contacted Robert Bush of Werke after the Helmut Hirth project fell through. Together, they assembled a team of designers and engineers to work on the bomber proposal. They built a new company under the name Versuchsbau GmbH and constructed a facility at Gotha Ost. To keep their construction away from enemy lines, they soon built a new facility at Staaken, close to Berlin, to produce their line of Zeppelin R planes. The company developed 34 prototype designs, but only their R6 variant entered production. 18 aircraft were built, 6 at Staaken, and the rest at Albatros and Chute de Lance under a subcontract to Aviatik. Design. Ferdinand von Zeppelin first conceptualized his massive aircraft in September of 1914. He wanted it to be bigger than a competing model also under development, the Gotha G1 heavy bomber. The engineers from Robert Bosch set to work, at first in a rented hangar at the Gotha factory. As chief engineer, they set up Alexander Baumann. The team also included Claudius Dornier, who in 1915 led the revolutionary construction of the all-metal Hugo Junkers design. The majority of Zeppelin Straaken aircraft used a variation of the pusher configuration for the engine setup, orientation, and the positioning of the power plants. The first of the planes built had its maiden flight in April 1915, using 3 engines. 2 of the engines were pusher style and 1 tractor. The design was a slightly swept-back biplane with leading edge, something that was retained for later models. When the new company was moved to Straaken, they were able to use a large number of Zeppelin's sheds already in the area. When Zeppelin Straaken R6 succeeded the previous model, it was found to be far more functional than the earlier versions in testing. It was powered by 6 engines, which drove 3 propellers, built primarily with wood and fabric. The final airframe was massive by standards at the time, and even still in comparison with modern planes. The biplane weighed 25,000 pounds when loaded to its limit, which included a disposable load of around 3,900 pounds. It could climb up to nearly 10,000 feet in 35 minutes and fly at a maximum speed of 84 miles per hour. Its range allowed it to travel only 497 miles, but it could stay in the air for 7 to 10 hours. To fly, it required a crew team of 7, but could carry a maximum of 9. Defensive gun positions were found at the nose, dorsal, and belly. Some models featured 2 more guns placed on top of the upper wings, which could be manned by the engine mechanics. One of the less common features of the era was the enclosed cabin that housed the 2 pilots, the navigator, and the radio operator. On the other hand, the gun positions were all exposed to the air. Of its 6 engines, 3 or 4 were placed between the wings, and 2 or 3 on the nose, depending on the model. The frontal engines drove a single propeller. All of the engines were fitted with self-starters, an additionally modern concept for the time. The mechanic cockpit was placed between the 2 engines and the nacelle. It included a ladder that led to his upper wing gun. The Germans experimented with supercharging the aircraft by giving the propeller-driving piston engines an additional power plant, marking the first known occasion that an airplane flew under such configuration. Still, that idea was only revisited with more seriousness and as less of an experiment during World War II.
I think he's referring to superchargers.
2 detachments, or Riesenflugzeugabteilungen, were in charge of operating the massive aircraft. They first employed them at the Eastern Front, and in 1917 began sending them to the UK. London received the majority of bombs from the Zeppelin R6s, but they also targeted Paris and smaller French cities at times. In total, Britain had 60,000 pounds of ordnance dropped on its territory, the largest amount dropped in World War I. One of the greatest complications dealt with by the crews of the massive machines was the fact that all missions were conducted at nighttime. The R-planes had no electronic navigational equipment, so they had to heavily rely on radio operator signals used by direction assistance stations in territory occupied by the German military. It was a less than ideal system that barely got the crews in and out of their target areas. There was little precision involved when the bombs were released. Furthermore, the large planes lacked power-assisted controls, which meant that intense manual efforts were required to pilot the aircraft. As an almost direct result, 8 out of the 18 production aircraft ended up crashing for reasons other than enemy attacks. Only 3 other crashes could be readily identified as a result of combat at the time. One R6 was shot down by the French on June 1, 1918, which allowed the Allies to examine the technology up close for the first time. In September of the same year, another R6 was taken down by Lieutenant Frank Broom from the Royal Air Force's very first night intruder defense squadron while piloting a Sopwith Camel. This occasion marks the only time that one of Germany's giant bombers was taken down by another aircraft. In August of 1919, the third Zeppelin R6 was taken down by Polish border troops when the aircraft was flying a diplomatic mission between Germany and Ukraine. A fourth incident presented something of a mystery. Crash site. Almost nothing of the R6, other than photographs and development documents, was thought to have survived the end of World War I. In 1981, however, members of the Amateur Historical Association Paul Capelle 1917 Association, working from the northeast of Ypres in West Flanders, Belgium, were notified of an unusual aircraft wreck. The destroyed plane was located by local farmer Daniel Perrin while plowing the land. After recovery, the long process of identification began. The incomplete wreck was initially believed to have been a French Georges Guinemer SPAD S-13. However, this theory was discredited when repair tools that did not match were found at the location. The discovery that the engine was a Mercedes D4A model led to the belief that it was perhaps a Gotha G aircraft. However, the recovered parts and materials painted an inconclusive picture, as they were common in multiple planes. The truth was not uncovered until 2007, when Piet Steen and Johann von Bezeliere were conducting identification research following a visit to a Krakow, Poland air museum. There, they saw a partial Zeppelin Straaken R6, which helped them finally identify the wreck discovered in 1981. With assistance from Polish aviation historians, they were able to trace it back to a Zeppelin that crashed in 1918, after fighting against the Royal Air Force at the Saint-Omer airfield. The aircraft is believed to have been destroyed after being hit by British anti-aircraft fire while attempting to cross the front line.
Well, that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. That's a follow-up. Like I said, maybe I should look up some Handley Page 0400s and do one on them. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and it's a learning experience. Part of being modelers is knowing the history behind the aircraft. I like doing that because doing the research, I might find a paint scheme that I really like, and then tailor my build towards that paint scheme. So, anyways, sorry about the noise. That's them downstairs. So, anyways, you have a nice day, and please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to donate to my channel, help me buy kits to review. I got to get my other kits out of the storage. I'm going to have to work on that one. I've been injured at work, so I'm off work too, so it kind of hurting the budget. But anyways, hope you enjoy, and hit the like, or I already said that, sorry. If you want to donate to my channel, just go to my Patreon page, or you can donate directly through my PayPal. And remember, every build's an adventure, so you go make it awesome, and you have a nice day.